My ground, November 220, Foxtrot Charlie.
Afternoon, November 220, Foxtrot Charlie, ground, go ahead.
22 Charlie, position 1414, request engine start.
220, Foxtrot Charlie, setup approved, QNH 1011, or 29er F6, departure runway 18.
29er 86, departure runway 18, approval for engine start.
It was hazy, and as we turned west, we had to climb over the mountains. We both kept a sharp eye outside until we reached 7,000 feet and were assured of clearing the mountains. On the other side is the country of Myanmar, the site of the 2008 cyclone disaster.
After departing the west coast of India, they would have 1,100 miles of open ocean before reaching Oman. They had to be sure of their remaining fuel and range prior to departing the coast of India. If they had to stop in India, it would mean a huge delay, as they didn't have the paperwork or permits.
We passed over India at night and could see the lights of the cities below. Our food during the flight consisted of Power Crunch bars and fruit. Triple chocolate was a favorite, and we had lots of grapes and apples. You can see Carol wearing her oxygen cannula. During nighttime flying, and when we were above 10,000 feet in altitude, we used oxygen. Daytime arrived, and we saw brown in the distance. It was land. It was Oman. Sana Radio had not answered our calls. This was Yemeni airspace, and we tried to contact them with no luck. As we got closer, we called Salalah Approach, and they answered and guided us in. We flew over the city of Salalah with all its square white buildings very close to the coast, and the airport on the other side. It was very gusty, and my landing wasn't great, but after adding a little power and straightening out, I finally put it down and taxied in. This was our first international arrival on our own, with no ground support teams to help out. We took care of the parking and landing payments right away, but there was a problem with the fuel that I'd ordered. It was located off the airport, and this was the first day of a 4-day holiday. It could not be delivered. Jay, our handler, took us to the offices below the tower to do the paperwork and file our next flight plan. Then he installed us in a waiting area where we were able to get coffee and cookies while he checked into our problem. Just over an hour later, a pickup truck arrived with a barrel of avgas in the rear. In another half hour, the pickup was on the ramp and I was siphoning the avgas into our tanks. I'd already practiced siphoning at home before the trip and knew that we could unload a barrel in less than half an hour. The next leg is only a short 5 hours down the Gulf of Aden, and we didn't need that much fuel. Most of these countries require full procedures, so we have all our charts ready. Sure enough, we're given a departure procedure Capit 1 Alpha.
Foxtrot Charlie, close to destination via flight plan route by Capit 1 Alpha departure.
We're cleared to and required to fly at 16,000 feet. The airway is lower, but that was part of the Yemen permit requirement. There are beautiful views of the mountains, but it's cold up here and the winds are unfavorable. After the air traffic control handoff, we ask for lower. We descend to 12,000 feet, feel warmer, and have tailwinds. After a short 4 hours, we're preparing for an approach into Djibouti. Our ground crew has been making phone calls during our flight, and the fuel truck pulls up as soon as we're parked. There are 4 barrels on a trailer with a hand pump. We put 1 barrel into the ferry tanks and almost fill the mains. It'll cost over $700 if we open the last barrel, and we're only 17 gallons short. That's almost $42 a gallon. Once you open a barrel, you pay for it, no matter how much you use. So I explained the situation to Carol, and we chose not to open the last barrel. Our handler gets us through immigration and customs and on a bus to the hotel. We haven't slept in a bed for over 35 hours, and we're both exceedingly tired. We each order room service and sleep soundly, having agreed to meet the bus at 6 a.m.
The next morning, the flight plan filing takes less than an hour, and our duo are back in the cockpit and taxiing out.
November 220, Foxtrot Charlie, backtrack, line up runway 09, clear flight level 125, VFR, destination Golf Alpha Bravo Sierra, via the Lat Bay, squawk for 300.
Departing Djibouti at sea level, we have to climb to 12,500 feet to get over the mountains in Ethiopia just 165 miles ahead of us. We climb over dry riverbeds and terraced fields in the higher hills. With the thin air at 12,500 feet, we had trouble climbing and just barely made it over the ridge. Finally, we were above the plateau, where we see more fields and farmlands.
After several hours, they leave Ethiopia behind, enter Sudan, and are able to descend to 8,000 feet.
HF communication was impossible on this leg. The propagation was not good. I tried every frequency and station that was on the chart, but just couldn't connect. So we couldn't send out updates to the ALS website, and only had satellite email and phone communication with our ground crews. All was proceeding well until the rear tank ran dry 4 hours earlier than planned. We quickly switched to the main tanks and ran calculations. We must have been short-loaded. In other words, less than the full barrels went into our tanks. We were 30 gallons short. We didn't have enough fuel to make it to Bamako, Mali. I emailed our ground crew and advised them of the situation and that we'd proceed to our alternate, Niamey, Niger, 700 miles closer and easily within reach. We were a little upset, but comfortable with our decision. Several hours later, we were informed by our ground crew that Niamey had no avgas. Wow, what a shock! Our decision was immediate. We'd continue to our destination, Niamey, and land safely. If high-octane car gas was available, we'd buy some of that and continue to Mali, our original destination.
The ground crews had a busy few hours. Finally, Fleming found avgas in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Our pilots didn't have a landing permit, but Bo was able to obtain one within hours.
We were leaning more aggressively as we dropped weight from using fuel. Finally, we determined that we had sufficient reserve to make Ouagadougou and wouldn't need to stop in Niamey.
Number 220 Charlie, clear to runway 04. Wind is 320 degrees, 03 knots.
We're clear to land, runway 04, Foxtrot Charlie.
Lasana, the handler, was extremely helpful. Bo, who got our landing permit, called while we were on the ground to make sure everything was okay. It had been a long night for the ground crews, and they were going to take a well-deserved rest. The refueling at Ouagadougou was efficient, and we were on our way in 1 hour and 15 minutes. We flew over Bamako, Mali, our intended landing point, and continued over Senegal as the sun came up, over Dakar, and then out over the ocean towards the Cape Verde Islands.
These islands were refueling points for early flights across the Atlantic Ocean. Anne Morrow Lindbergh wrote of them in her book Listen, the Wind. and remarked at how the wind never stopped blowing.
The ground crew at Safeport were extremely helpful. They provided coffee for our arrival, did the customs paperwork on site, and called for the fuel truck. Carol took care of filing the flight plan while I refueled and checked the plane over. A hotel rest had been planned, but we'd received information on a cold front racing across the Gulf and forecast to be over Orlando at 10 a.m. the following morning. We calculated that we could land ahead of it if we didn't stop at the hotel.
After 2 hours and 45 minutes on the ground, CarolAnn and Carol climbed back in the cockpit for the final leg.
This was the longest leg, 3,300 nautical miles. But with lots of options for refueling in the Caribbean and Bahamas, we were less worried about endurance. We continued through the evening and night, receiving updates from our ground crews. The moon had progressed during the week from half to full, and there was a beautiful full moon to guide us around the few clouds that reached our 6,000-foot altitude.
Finally, they were crossing the Bahamas with visions of victory and a successful flight in their heads. Our pilots were positive and upbeat in the cockpit, and air traffic control started sending congratulatory messages.
220 Foxtrot Charlie, Orlando Tower, good morning. Congratulations and welcome home. Runway 18 right, wind 170 at 16, gust 22, clear to land.
Excellent. Clear to land at Orlando. 220 Foxtrot Charlie.
Our pilots beat the storm by 90 minutes. TV crews and newspaper journalists were there for the story. There were lots of hugs from friends for their arrival and for the successful flight. The champagne was opened. CarolAnn Garratt and Carol Foy succeeded in circumnavigating the world in 8 days, 12 hours, and 20 minutes, an average of 115.35 miles per hour, smashing the old record of 54.6 miles per hour. But unfortunately, due to the economic environment, the Dash received no major corporate donations. But pilots and followers did donate to ALS before, during, and after the trip, bringing the fund total to $172,000 as of the end of 2008, and donations are still being accepted.
This flight's for you, Chip, and it's for you, Augie, and for you, Keith, and for all the 30,000 patients with ALS in the United States and the 330,000 worldwide.
ALS is a terminal disease. When diagnosed with it, a patient has no hope. There is no cure.
The world record is achieved, but we'll keep spreading the word about ALS and raising donations for research.